U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan, and Governor Andrew Cuomo.
First of all, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Governor Cuomo, I would like to welcome you all to Building Back Better. This is a conference to kick off the Governor's New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program, and what a great crowd. We appreciate you taking time to be here. In just a few minutes, you'll be hearing from Reverend Dr. Leslie Mullings, Senator Betty Little, our great Governor, Governor Andrew Cuomo, and also the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan. Today, we launch what we believe will be a watershed moment in the history of New York State. A comprehensive community-led approach to protecting our communities better against future natural disasters. As recently as just a few weeks ago, when residents of the Mohawk Valley region were hit by devastating floods, we have seen evidence that we live in a new reality. Extreme weather is no longer the exception. It is now too often the rule, as many of you know. The new reality means that we must make long-term resilience at least as important as immediate disaster relief efforts. We must all build back better. We all know that in many cases, we have to make significant changes in our communities. We need to reconsider how we construct our homes and commercial buildings. We need to be smart about how our roads and public spaces should be built and maintained. And we need to think about our relationship with the shoreline to ensure both safer communities and economic growth. Today, you will hear from many speakers who have helped communities across the country and across the world recover from major disasters. There'll be mayors, not-for-profit leaders, architects, academics, and others. One common thread in their presentations is that the community itself must be involved, or else planning for the future will not be successful. The program we're launching today takes that as a premise, so we are already one step ahead, and it is the underlying belief of Governor Cuomo how business is done. It starts from the bottom up in communities. As you will hear throughout today, the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program, also referred to as the Community Reconstruction Zone, or the CRZ program, is about giving the communities themselves tools they need to plan for resilience and helping fund those plans once they are completed. The community itself takes the lead, and the state supports and follows. Over the next 8 months, each community will review both the challenges it faces and the opportunities to build back better than before. This program will help community leaders complete that process successfully. To start us off, we have a video that provides some context for and some information about the program, as well as some of the examples of successful efforts by communities to build back better. Now please join me in watching the video.
I just received a full briefing from our emergency response teams, including FEMA. Obviously, everybody is aware at this point that this is going to be a big and powerful storm.
More than 2 million people have been evacuated along the East Coast. An estimated 26 million people will be affected by it today and in the coming days.
We are announcing that we are going to close the Holland Tunnel and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel.
Common sense says you should start taking precautions. Get ready just in case.
This is a record surge of water that we're witnessing right now.
60 million Americans will feel its power.
Do not underestimate this storm.
Creeks, now raging rivers.
Take a look at the flooding situation over here.
All of a sudden, I had white caps going through the yard.
Sustained winds here are easily over 30 miles an hour.
Hurricane Irene has unleashed itself on the east coast of America.
But our town is devastated. We've all lost our houses.
A fire has destroyed at least 50 homes.
The Battery Tunnel in Lower Manhattan, this gets you out of the city. The tunnel is totally flooded.
It was beyond anything I'd ever seen, and certainly beyond anything I'd ever imagined.
I really didn't know how this community was going to build back up.
This was my place of refuge. Where am I going to go from here?
Never in the history of this state had we seen destruction like this. But we were not alone. From the very beginning, Governor Cuomo was with us.
These communities not only need to be rebuilt as we believe they should be rebuilt, they need to be restored in terms of spirit and ethic. So we're going to say to the communities themselves, if you come together, we will fund your vision of what this community needs to be restored.
The New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program is a new tool created by the State of New York for long-term storm recovery. Each New York Rising Community Reconstruction Plan will be a bottom-up rebuilding plan using federal and state funds. 102 communities throughout the state damaged by Hurricane Irene, Tropical Storm Lee, Superstorm Sandy, and the recent flooding in the Mohawk Valley are being designated New York Rising communities. New York Rising communities will be eligible for extensive state and federal support, including $500 million in Community Development Block Grant funds, $250 million in Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funds, priority consideration and expedited approvals for state programs, private investment leveraged by the Department of Financial Services. While the state and federal governments provide funding and technical assistance, the communities do the planning. They know their own needs best. Communities will complete their plans in 8 months or less. Communities will submit their plans by next April, and awards will be made beginning in the spring. Communities will receive bonus awards for successful outcomes such as regional cooperation, partnerships between local government and the private sector, and community participation in the planning process.
The grassroots effort in this area has been amazing. Difficult situations reveal character, they don't make character. We've seen evidence of that in our situation. People have stepped up into leadership that never thought they could. That's the kind of character that people here have, that strength, that determination, that faith and hope in the future, and that ability to bounce back from adversity. The CRZ program is offering communities a chance to do their own planning with some collaboration with the state, with local resources, because the local people know what those resources are and how to best help.
It was devastating to me to see all types of electricity out, people walking around without water. After the storm, staff members went door to door, not only to find out what the needs, but to deliver information about FEMA, about other distribution points for food, water, clothing, and to guide them along how they can alleviate or at least find ways where they can get information, where they can make an educated decision on what they could do with their homes now that they've been damaged.
When I witnessed the destruction for the first time, I had come back to the store in the morning, and when I walked in and saw about 3 feet of sand and everything devastated, I knew my life just changed. What really kept me going was looking around at my neighbors, fellow business owners. Seeing them pushing to move forward gave me even more strength to keep going forward, and I knew that I was going to rebuild, and I knew there was going to be some good to come out of this.
In the late 19th century, New York was a booming city. That led to many great things, but it also meant the city was prone to disasters of a kind that had never happened before. In December of 1835, New York had one of the worst catastrophes of its history, a fire, the Great Fire of 1835, which did unimaginable damage. So the big solution, the big innovation, was this waterworks system, the first way in which the city grid had been underlaid with a whole second network, invisible to the eye, but there at all times, taking the form of a hydrant on every corner. In March of 1888, just when the winter was almost over, there was this immense blizzard, and it covered the entire city in snow for 3 days, and telegraph communication had been disrupted. So a very simple but powerful and expensive expedient was decided on: bury the telegraph lines. And that was an immense new precedent in the city because it was difficult to do and expensive, but it was decided to be done.
In 1921, San Antonio had a 100-year flood. It took out 1,000 acres of the city. It was a truly devastating flood for a community that size. Because the river goes through the center of downtown, it's always been this idea of making it into a park. The idea was Venice, to open businesses up along the river, and that plan became the Riverwalk that you see today.
After the earthquake in 1989, San Francisco was really faced with these giant freeways that separated the city from its waterfront came down. Rather than rebuilding the freeway as it was, they decided to reconnect the city with the waterfront. And it really generated this amazing new waterfront space for the city. So it was a great example of how the economics can completely change in a way for the better. Well, Tulsa, Oklahoma is a great example of a mid-sized city that has dealt comprehensively with water management and river flooding issues. In the 60s and 70s in Tulsa, they experienced repeated flooding every 2 to 4 years. And this resulted in a great coalition between the community and the local government. Community members helped design the mapping process and were very integral in the conceptualization of the Greenway itself. And so today, this network of greenways along the Arkansas River and its tributaries are among the region's greatest assets.
Sure, we had one of these disasters after another, but in every case, the very fact of responding to the disaster moved the evolution of New York, and with it all cities, forward.
And one of the things that you realize about the character of New Yorkers is that they reach out and help each other.
I just want to thank this guy. It's very emotional to be through everything that we've been through, and to have somebody at your back like this guy here.
I'm very proud to be a New Yorker because we don't let anything destroy us. We'll constantly push forward, we'll overcome. New Yorkers are the best.
I think as we look to the future, there's not only the hope to rebuild, but to create something even better.
We come back, and we come back even stronger. We work together, we work as a team, we work coordinated. And the challenge here for us is not just to build back, but to build back better.
It's a great video. Before I bring up our next speaker, as a point of personal privilege, I just want to point out something I'm very proud of. Most of my career has been in local government, and in my career, I've not seen a governor who has been as responsive, as boots on the ground, leading from the front, as our governor has over the last 2.5 years through each one of these disasters. Those that work around him see it. I'm sure you saw it as well throughout the state. Leadership does matter, especially during difficult times, and this man has led from the front since day one. So I just want to say that before I bring up our next speaker. I'm very proud of him. And it gives me great pleasure to bring up now, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Dr. Leslie Mullings from the Community Church of the Nazarene in Far Rockaway. In addition to delivering the invocation at the 2013 State of the State Address, Reverend Dr. Mullings spoke about the ongoing recovering efforts taking place in his community and others that were severely impacted by Hurricane Sandy. We're honored to have him here today, and he, like many of you in the room today, has personally suffered through this tragedy as well. So please welcome Reverend Dr. Mullings.
Thank you. On December 29th last year, Hurricane Sandy brought disastrous conditions through New York City. Communities along the eastern seaboard were rocked by gale-force winds and massive flooding. New York City, especially the Rockaways, was among the worst areas affected by hurricane, and my church in Central Avenue was at the center of this destruction. Never in the history of this state had we seen destruction like this, and we feared our community would never recover. So we turned our church into an emergency shelter. We served thousands of hot meals and provided support, delivered tons of help and support for many, many people. But we were not alone. From the very beginning, Governor Cuomo was with us at my church, on site, many, many times, as were the National Guard and volunteers from across the state of New York. The governor showed us the New York way, that if one community is hit by a hurricane, all our communities are hit by a hurricane, and we all share that suffering. And when we rebuild stronger and better than before, then New York as a whole is stronger and better than before, and we share that success. Governor Cuomo took swift action to ensure that we had the necessary resources to start the recovery and rebuilding efforts as soon as possible. Now, almost 9 months later, thanks to Governor Cuomo's effort, we are not only rebuilding our communities, but on a path to a brighter future. By empowering communities through the storm recovery program, the areas severely impacted by Sandy, Irene, and Lee will be able to invest in ways to strengthen their infrastructure, redesign their neighborhoods to build back better and smarter for further natural disasters. The governor's steadfast commitment, as well as the volunteers' effort of New Yorkers statewide, continue to provide unwavering source of relief and comfort for our community. The governor was with us when Sandy made landfall. He was with us in the immediate aftermath, and he continued to fight for us until we got the funds we needed from the federal government. This conference is another example of the leadership that we have come to expect from Governor Cuomo. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce Senator Betty Little.
Thank you, Dr. Mullins, and thank you, Governor, for allowing me to participate in this ceremony and this conference that we're having here today. The flooding in the Mohawk Valley these past few weeks has certainly reminded many of us, probably all of us here, of an incident that you have had in your community and what you have had to undergo. We in the North Country were hit by Irene and somewhat by Lee, but disaster hit some of our communities in a really, really tough way. And in that time, Governor Cuomo came to our community. He was there when we needed to have the road that led to Lake Placid. Route 73 was totally wiped out. And that was the main way to get into the main part of the North Country. And had that road opened within 2 to 3 weeks, working with the Department of Transportation. The Keene Fire Department, part of the fire department, fell into the river, wiped away with the storm. He was there to have that rebuilt, came up with the money when we needed it, when we had shortcomings. Certainly when you watch the pictures that we saw in the film, you're reminded and have a vision of what took place and reminded of the disaster that happened. But I think each of us has a vision in our head that sticks with you when you have something like this happen. I remember the Wells Library, watching the people bring the books out of the library, covered with mud, wet, ruined, in a pile out in front of the library. But there was one incident that will always stay with me. There was a woman sitting on a deck, small wooden deck, used to be attached to her house. The house was totally collapsed. And here's this woman sitting there on this deck, and we're walking by. The governor was there to assess the situation again, and he walked up and sat in the other chair with that woman on the deck. You know, we all know that there's physical damage when we have these storms and these things happen, but there is also human toll that takes place here. And I really am very, very grateful to the governor for his thoughtfulness, for his caring in this storm. And I'm sure he's done it in your area as well. But he didn't forget the people that are being hurt and were hurt through this. So he had stood by us side by side as we've gone through all of this, and he's ready to stand by us side by side as we prepare to be ready in case something like this happens again. Everyone learns a lesson from a disaster, and we will, and our emergency preparedness will be better than it has ever been. But the good part about these reconstruction zones is they're not coming from the top. They're kind of modeled after the economic development zones. It's from the bottom. And that's why we are all here today, local government people working hard to represent your community. We are the ones who are going to work hard with the help of the governor and New York State to build better, safer, and stronger. The governor really stepped up to the plate in the North Country, and I will tell you that there are times when the North Country has been forgotten, but we were not forgotten then. And no part of the state was forgotten, be it the Long Island, New York City, the Hudson Valley, the Mohawk Valley. The governor's been with us and stood with us time and time again, and it is really not just an honor, but it is a privilege for me to be able to introduce to you Andrew Cuomo, governor of the greatest state, New York.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Welcome to Albany. For those of you who don't come often, we're in full bloom here in Albany for you. We have the Capitol has all been restored, so I hope you go by and you take a look at the Capitol. We reopened the second floor recently, the Hall of Governors. So that is magnificent. We have a great display right now in the concourse. So walk up and down the concourse. We have a great display from the museum on summertime in New York, and a whole different display of vehicles that are used during the summertime and ways of recreation. We also have my personal favorite display, this is the one I put together, which is we have Paul Tuttle Jr.'s motorcycle that won the Biker Build-Off, which I know you all watched attentively. And my motorcycle is also on display because Paul did his version of the state flag painted on my motorcycle. There goes anonymity, by the way. But look at it today because it's going to be on the road tomorrow, so today is your last day. First, to Senator Betty Little, I want to thank her very much for that kind introduction. And, you know, in situations like this, you really learn about people. You learn about yourself, but you also learn about other people. And when you walk with Senator Little in her district, you get a sense of her connection, her relatedness. She's everybody's neighbor. She's everybody's friend. And in essence, that's the truest form of public service. And it was my honor to work with her on that and many other matters. She's just a fantastic representative for the people of the state of New York, and she's an example of how good public service can be when it's at its best. Senator Betty Little, pleasure to be with you. Reverend Mullings, who you heard from, was from Far Rockaway, which was really, utterly devastated by the storm. It had problems that it was dealing with before the storm, and the storm made it worse. But I found inspiration from the Reverend. I got to his church and the first time, and he had basically handed over his church to the government officials to use as a base station. And the pews were taken out, the religious artifacts were taken out, FEMA moved in, state had desks, the city had desks, and he turned his church basically into a depot for people to come to sign up for services, to collect water, to collect food, etc. And in some ways, I said, this is the truest form of religion in action, and a church in action, doing community service, and literally turning the place upside down to serve the people of the community. And it inspired me that day, and it does today. Reverend Mullings, pleasure to be with you. You heard from Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy, who is my administration's single best asset, and anyone who is familiar with what this state government has done over the past 2 years knows how valuable Bob Duffy is to the team. Bob Duffy, pleasure to be with you. And I would also like to recognize what for me sort of is the emblem of what so much of this is about, that we're talking about today, so much of what we have gone through, voluntarism, citizenship, people doing the right thing, quote unquote. And those of you who've been through one of these experiences have, I am sure, had the same feeling that I've had. The National Guard in this state, if there is one constant and one asset and one group of people who have been dedicated, who have been tireless, who bring confidence just by their presence, it's been the National Guard of the state of New York, and Brigadier General Raymond Shield is with us today representing him. And I'd ask him to stand so we can all thank him. I have two stories for you. First story is the story of the farmer and the flood. Farmer is living in the rural part of the county, and it starts to rain, and the government officials are watching the weather map, and they have a sense that this might be a flood situation. So it's been raining for a while, the water's starting to move, and the government officials get in a big truck, and they go out to the rural part of the county, and they go to the farmer's farmhouse, and they knock on the door, and the farmer comes to the door, and they say, look, we're from the emergency services operation. We've been watching the weather maps. They're talking about a potential flood, and we think you should take yourself and your belongings to safety, and we have a truck outside, and we can help you. And the farmer looks back at them and says, thank you, but I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday. The Lord will take care of me. And government officials turn around, leave, go back to their office. Sure enough, the rain keeps coming, and the rain keeps coming, and now the water's about 6 feet deep. And it's a serious situation, but the government officials are industrious, and they get in a boat. And they go out to the farmhouse in the boat. And they knock on the door, and the farmer comes to the door, and he says, well, we told you, weather map and rain, now it's 6 feet, but don't worry. It's not too late. We have a boat out in the front of the house, and we can take you and your belongings to safety. And the farmer says, no, thank you. I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday. The Lord will take care of me. They said, yeah, I know that, the Lord, but we have a boat, and it's really serious, and we're nervous, and we think you should get in the boat. And they go back and forth a little bit, but they can't convince the farmer to get in the boat, and they leave again in the boat, and they're frustrated. They get back to the headquarters, and rain comes. Worst case scenario, the dam breaks. And now it's a terrible flood. The whole town is wiped out, but these government officials are still concerned, and there's 20 feet of water, and literally houses are floating away. And here's the farmer standing on the roof of his farmhouse, and the water is up to his neck, and only his head is above the water line. And he's looking up to the heavens, and he's looking at the clouds, and there's a rumbling sound. And the clouds start to part, and there's a rumbling sound, and there's a helicopter. And it's the government officials in the helicopter. And the government officials say, throw out a rope. And they say, farmer, it's not too late. Grab the rope and we will pull you up to safety. And the farmer just his head above the water says, no, I'm a God-fearing man. I go to church every Sunday. The Lord will take care of me. I say, forget that. Grab the rope before it's too late. Next scene, the farmer is at the pearly gates. And he runs into our maker. And our maker says, welcome to heaven. He says, well, thank you. I guess it's better than the alternative. But he says to our maker, you know, I'm a little confused. I was a God-fearing man. I went to church every Sunday. I thought that you would take care of me. And our maker looked back at the farmer and said, you're confused. I'm confused. I sent a truck, a boat, and a helicopter. What happened? And the point of the story is, at one point it is up to you. And today, and on this mission, it is up to you. Second story, I was inspired by Secretary Donovan. I was named HUD Secretary, and I was giving my inaugural address when you become HUD Secretary. And I had worked on the vision for HUD and what HUD was going to do, and the HUD constituents, Housing and Urban Development, came to this swearing in. Cabinet Secretary was a big deal. I've gone backwards in my career, but at one time I was a cabinet member, and I was giving the inaugural speech, and in the front row were Native American chiefs who had come in the full tribal garb and were very impressive, and they were right there in the front row. And when I would talk, I'd look down and I'd see the Native American chiefs, and I ad-libbed a little bit as I was going through the remarks, and I said, and one of the things I want to serve better than ever before, the Native Americans were served by HUD. HUD does the housing on Indian reservations all across the country. And I said, and during my time as secretary, I want to visit every Native American tribe that HUD serves. And I went on, finished the remarks, I went back up to the chief of staff, who knew the department better than I did. I said, how'd that go? He said, well, fine. He said, you know, you threw a few things in there that we didn't talk about. I said, yeah, a few, but what? What did I throw in? He said, well, you threw in that whole thing about visiting every tribe that HUD serves. I said, well, I was appreciative that they came and they were there, and I wanted to show my appreciation. I said, plus, how many tribes could there be? What do I know? I'm from Queens, right? How many tribes? He said, oh, about 500. I said, 500. So suffice it to say, I was on many Indian reservations during my time as HUD Secretary. And one of the first ones was in Alaska. And I went to visit the tribe in Alaska, and it was HUD housing, and I was being taken on a tour by the chief of the HUD housing on the reservation. And we went into the first home, and we're in the kitchen, we're looking around, it was very nice. But where the kitchen sink was, it was filled with food items, so it was clear that they weren't using the kitchen sink, which I thought was a little different, but I didn't say anything. We're going through the house, and we go to the bathroom, and look in the bathroom, and the bathroom, the shower area is basically being used as a closet. Clothes are hanging in the tub shower area, which I thought was a little different, but I didn't say anything. I then go to look at the second house. And second house, the same thing. Kitchen sink is gone. Go to look at the bathroom facility, and the facilities are taken out of the bathroom, and they're using it for storage. So I said to the chief, because I didn't know if I was going to make a cultural faux pas here or what, I said, well, it's interesting, Chief. The doesn't look like they're using the facilities a lot in this. He said, no. I said, but they're here. but they're just not being used. He said, yeah, that's right. I said, well, that's a little peculiar. Chief said, well, HUD regulations say for every home, it has to have a kitchen, the kitchen has to have a sink, it has to be plumbed. For every 2 bedrooms, there has to be a bathroom. That's in the HUD regulations. I said, yeah, but those are good regulations, right? Those are good ideas. You have a kitchen, you have a sink, 2 bedrooms, you have a bathroom. That's a good regulation. He said, no, Mr. Secretary, I think it's a very good regulation. Just, we don't have any running water here. And, you can have something that sounds like a really good idea. That is a state regulation or a federal regulation or a county regulation. But you don't really know what's happening on the ground, and you don't really know what the effect of that is going to be in that community. And really, that community does know best what needs to be done and how it needs to be tailored to that need in that specific instance. So yes, good intent by government officials, but the effect can be different. And having the voice and the intelligence of the input of the community is essential. So what is the goal of all of this? We want to build back better. We want to take what was a terrible, unfortunate incident and make it as positive as it can be. Take that energy that has been created and make it a positive energy and a force for change rather than a negative energy and a reason for despair. So we have a 2-prong approach. First prong, we've spent a lot of time on, we've worked for many, many months, which is a federal, state, county, typical, top-down effort, where we're running housing reconstruction programs, infrastructure programs, remediation programs, renewal programs, run by the federal government and the state government and the county government. We've worked very hard with the liaison with the local communities to make that relationship work. But it's basically a top-down approach. And we've been operating on that level. What we're trying to do today is a totally different approach and a totally different prong. And if we've been going top-down, bottom-up, what does the community think it needs to rebuild? And what are the best ideas and what's the best vision that the community has to rebuild? And let's fund the community's vision rather than asking the community to fit in to the template that is established up above. And if you can put both of those approaches together, well, that would really be the optimum. So the federal government's doing what it should be doing, the state's doing what it should be doing, but the community is also fashioning the specifics to work for the community. And that's what the CRZs, pick whatever acronym you want, is what it's all about. Saying to the community, look, the goal here is for you to rebuild a community that is better than before, that is productive economically, that is sustainable, that is safe, and that is inclusive and is true to the concept and the word of community. And you tell us how that would work. We need to rebuild homes. What's the best way to rebuild homes that were damaged? And you know better than I. I was in Suffolk with County Executive Ballone after Sandy, walking down a block towards the water. And the block was basically perpendicular to the water. And we started at the end of the block and we're walking towards the water, and home after home destroyed. And talking to the homeowners on the front of the porch, and they were telling about the storm damage and they're bringing things out of the home, and we're walking down the block closer to the water. And house after house, the same story. We get to the water, and the fella in the home that was actually on the water doesn't have a care in the world. He's polishing his car in the front yard. And we stop and we chat with him, and we say, well, what damage did you have? None. Why? He built his house on piers after the previous storm, And the house that should have been the most damaged, because it was right there on the waterfront, no damage whatsoever. So, what's the best way to rebuild? And what's the smartest way to rebuild? The old expression, measure twice, cut once. I'd rather rebuild the house once the right way and spend a little more to rebuild the house than rebuild the house 3 times over the next coming years. Ask the community those questions. Question of buyout options is a question that's best handled by the community. You will have people and places that say, I don't want to go through this again. Some homes have been flooded 2, 3, 4 times in as many years. Some people are going to choose to literally move to higher ground. That's a viable option, but that's an option that should be handled on the community level. What is the best way to make the environment resilient to this kind of damage? How do we handle the streams and rivers in your community? There are streams and rivers that are the perpetual problem. The rain comes, they can tell you as soon as it starts to rain what stream is going to rise up, what creek is going to rise up and become a monster. Well, what is the remediation that should be done beforehand? So we don't have to live through this time after time after time after time. And I understand the environmental sensitivity about streams and creeks and not wanting to destroy or hurt the fish population. I get that. But I'm also concerned with the human population and people's lives. And that balance is going to be important. So these issues are issues that are best done by the community. How does the program work? It's going to be very simple. There are 102 communities. Each community has an amount of money that it can qualify for if it has an eligible plan. The 102 communities qualify for anywhere from $3 million to $25 million, depending on the population and the amount of damage that county has sustained, using the FEMA primarily damage estimates. They have to be CDBG eligible activities, which is a very, very broad classification. The Community Development Block Grant Program is the most flexible federal funding that there is. But that community comes up with a plan that meets its needs, they qualify for the funding. The community has 8 months to prepare the plan on the outside. If you come up with a plan sooner than the 8 months, we'll fund it when you're ready. There has to be community participation. We want people involved. We want this truly to be a bottom-up, but you tell us what you need to rebuild, and we'll fund the local community's needs. Besides the target amount, there's also going to be a bonus for what we consider the best plans. We like the notion of competition. It's worked well for us in a lot of economic development situations, the regional economic development councils, et cetera. So we're going to award special awards for the best plans in 8 areas that we're trying to stress. Areas like the best community involvement, the best use of technology in planning, the best regional collaborations. Those best plans will also be eligible to win an additional $3 million. So there is funding to implement the community vision. Assembling the community vision is more difficult than it sounds because you have to bring people together and you have to deal with differing views. But combining that top-down approach and the bottom-up approach, I am convinced, is the best way to do it. The last question is this: how do we win the money? Which is always the last question. How do we succeed? Last question is, why do some communities come back and other communities don't come back? And we end where we started. It's the story of the farmer and the flood. It is up to you. It is up to you. The difference, the intangible between communities that thrive and communities that die, to me, comes down to leadership. And you are the leaders of your community. And it is up to you. We can give you federal funding and technical assistance and conferences, and state commissioners will be there to help, but it's going to be up to you. And do you have the leadership that creates the energy to keep that community moving forward and building back better than before from what could be a terrible, negative, disastrous situation? It takes organization, it takes discipline, it takes patience, it takes commitment. It takes an inclusiveness to get to yes. You have to turn off the negative voice, turn off the little minds, the naysayers who neither build nor dream but want to tear down, the cynics, the pessimists, and you have to keep driving forward and saying, yes, we can. I know we went through a tough time, but I know we can come back better than before. You have to dig deep and remember who you are. Remember, we are New Yorkers at the end of the day. Remember the blood that's in your veins. Remember what built this state in the first place. Remember where we come from. We come from good and powerful stock. We came from dreamers, immigrants, who got in little boats and went across great oceans to a land of promise and said, just give me the chance to build. Just give me the chance to work. That's who we are. That's what we've always been. That's what you saw in the video. You give us a cholera epidemic, we come back with a new water system. You give us a great fire, we'll come back with a new innovation. That's what we have always been. You knock us down, we get up twice as strong, twice as ready. That's the story of New York. And that's the leadership that you have to bring back to your community after today. It's up to you. It takes you. And if it takes one other item, it takes us. It takes you and it takes us. It takes us together. It takes the federal government and the state government and the local governments and the not-for-profits and the communities working together, cooperating, collaborating, not competing. It takes regions coming together. It's Nassau and Suffolk together. The boundaries don't matter. The divisions don't matter. The unity is what provides us strength. It's Jay and Keene together, not competing, but working together. It's Staten Island and Brooklyn together, cooperating, collaborating. We're here together with a common challenge. That's what made this state the Empire State. We remember that. We're not just going to build what was, we're going to build to a level that never was before, because New Yorkers, when we are united, there is nothing that can beat us. No storm, no flood, no disaster. Nothing has before, and nothing ever will. And this is the start off of unleashing the community potential to make that possible. And it's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I have a real treat to introduce the current HUD secretary, and I know a little bit about being a HUD secretary, but I can tell you he's going to go down as one of the truly great HUD secretaries. He has a national reputation as a housing and community development expert. He's done fantastic work in HUD. He's done even better work beyond HUD. The president named Sean Donovan the head of the Reconstruction Task Force to deal with Hurricane Sandy et al. Now, this is no small undertaking. It's monumental. You have to coordinate something called the federal government. Federal coordination may be an oxymoron in and of itself, to tell you the truth, and I can say that as a former federal official. Sean has been a miracle worker in getting all those agencies to somehow work together and come up with a single comprehensive funding vehicle for us. I can also tell you this, the luck of the situation for us has been the Sandy appropriation that this state received. If you remember, right after Hurricane Sandy, we worked very hard to get a supplemental appropriation. And we worked in a bipartisan way. We worked with the congressional delegation. We all came together, and we prevailed upon Washington to give us a supplemental appropriation, which will be about $30 billion for the state of New York. $30 billion is a lot of money. Not only did we get the $30 billion in this Sandy supplemental, in the law, the Sandy supplemental can also be used for storms Irene and Lee. And that's what gets us the southern tier and the Hudson Valley and the North Country. So that was really a remarkable piece of work. It would not have happened but for Sean Donovan fighting for us at the Congress and fighting for us in the White House to get us that $30 billion. And that has given us the opportunity to do what we're talking about today, building back better. I had the honor of working with Sean when I was HUD Secretary and he was the FHA Deputy Commissioner. So I've seen him up close and personal. But to have that personal relationship and then to see him become HUD Secretary and see him ride to the rescue for the state that I love and the people that I love has been a special honor for me. And it's my true privilege to introduce and give you Secretary Sean Donovan.
Governor Cuomo, Andrew, thank you for that kind introduction. If anyone has it on their video camera, I'd like to show it to my mother after we're done. Andrew talked about the work that we have done together. And one of the great pleasures of my professional career has been learning from Andrew Cuomo at HUD, working with him when I was commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and he was Attorney General, to put together one of the first in the nation efforts to fight back against the terrible foreclosure crisis that hit so many of our cities and communities around the country. And now, to be able to help him, and you don't believe those words about him going backwards. I have never seen Andrew Cuomo go backwards. He is governor of this state. He has been a remarkable, remarkable leader. He has provided the steadiness of hand, the boldness of vision that this state needs at all times, but particularly in times of crisis that we have seen. And I just want to thank you personally, Andrew, for your leadership, for your mentorship, and for your friendship, and in helping New Yorkers get back on their feet all over this great state. Thank you. I also want to say thank you to every one of you. Each of you, in your unique communities, in your unique ways, you have been champions for change. You are doing the work that is helping build a stronger New York, house by house, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood. And at a time when so many people are still hurting, I can't think of any more important work that we can do to begin to restore the deficit of trust too many have in the work that the public sector can do. I also want to say thank you, not just in my professional capacity as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and also as the chair of the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. I also want to say thank you as a New Yorker. I was born and grew up in New York City, and I watched from a distance in Washington last October when a devastating storm hit our home with a power and a fury unlike anything most of us had seen before. In its wake, it left behind a severely damaged region. Entire neighborhoods were devastated. Our friends and neighbors lost their homes. They lost their most treasured possessions. And most tragically, some lost their lives, including a close friend and colleague of mine in Brooklyn. So even though Hurricane Sandy left months ago, the heartache and pain that it caused remains to this day. And in the bigger picture, Sandy is a reminder of why we must rethink how we build and rebuild going forward. Big storms that used to come once every generation seem to be occurring every year now. Or in the recent case of Oklahoma City, within 10 days of each other. So in the light of this new reality, it's not enough for any region to rebuild their communities back to the way they were. Instead, we've got to build better and stronger communities that can withstand emerging environmental threats. That's what makes President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force such an important effort. The task force, which I chair, coordinates the efforts of federal, state, and local partners to work towards a single goal: shaping a stronger and safer region that can meet future challenges. To make this goal a reality, the President promised that the federal government would fully support our work, and he has kept that commitment. As the governor said, billions of federal dollars have already flowed into the region, with much more on the way. I was especially proud that HUD issued our first allocation of the Community Development Block Grant resources that Andrew talked about, totaling more than $5 billion, 8 days after the president signed the supplemental into law. That was the fastest that any allocation had ever been made in the history of the program. And in April, I was proud to come and join your great governor here in Albany to announce that we were starting forward to put that money to work in the state of New York. That first allocation is $1.7 billion for New York's recovery activities, and it included a first allocation of $25 million to get this program, the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program, up and running and to get us to this important day. And I know, as the governor laid out, that future allocations of that Community Development Block Grant money will help you realize the visions that you all are starting to form today and have begun work on in the months ahead. I could not be more excited about the possibilities of this effort. A big part of the reason for that is that when President Obama asked me to chair the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force, he made it absolutely clear that this had to be a local, community-driven process. I still remember the very first meeting we had with him in the Oval Office. We talked through the scale of the destruction. We talked through what we could do to get a supplemental of the scale and scope necessary to help the region rebuild. But the very last thing he said to us as we were all about to leave the meeting, he said, and one more thing, no Bigfoot. No Bigfoot. What did he mean by that? He meant this can't be about the federal government coming in and telling communities how to rebuild. This has to be the federal government coming in and saying, what's your vision? What do you want your community to be? And how can we help? Rebuilding simply doesn't work when it's imposed from the top down. I saw this very closely when the president asked me and Secretary Janet Napolitano to go back and look at what had happened in the wake of Katrina, to learn the lessons of past disasters and to lay out a new framework for disaster recovery and rebuilding. Something we call the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which has been deployed for the very first time in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Everything we do on the task force has been guided by the principle that rebuilding must have a local vision at the heart of it. And I want to particularly recognize the many members of our advisory group for the task force that are here today and that have helped us at every step along the way shape the strategy that we will deliver to the President in August, just a few weeks away. It is also the very same conviction that in that importance of locally driven rebuilding that underlies the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program. I know that Governor Cuomo has laid out to you many of the aspects of the program, and I know that you've got an afternoon filled with conversations about how this will work. But I just want to mention a few of the things that I find so encouraging about this effort. First of all, the program encourages communities to look at rebuilding not just as a series of individual projects, but as an integrated process that leaves communities and the entire region stronger, more economically competitive, and better able to withstand future storms. I'll never forget the first meeting I had with all the major transit agencies in the region. We were talking about what we could do to rebuild smarter, stronger, and what they said, one of the great problems here is too often we look at this in our individual silos, in our individual agencies, without understanding the way that what we do affects each other. And the head of Amtrak told a story that has stayed with me to this day. He said, you know what? Lots of people are talking about, well, we got to build gates over our tunnels. We got to protect our infrastructure. We had a gate over the tunnel that went underneath the Hudson. We decided not to close it because if we had, Penn Station probably would have flooded that day. That led the head of the MTA to mention, well, you know what? Because the Battery Tunnel flooded, the East River didn't meet the Hudson across Canal Street that day. It probably would have happened if we hadn't had flooding in the Battery Tunnel. Why do I tell this story? Because all of this is connected. If we don't think about how what one agency does affects another, what one community does affects another, we will not rebuild the region or the communities that we all need. And so this is deeply built into the DNA of this effort that we are announcing today. These planning committees that will be formed in each of the community reconstruction zones reflect a community-wide approach to rebuilding and will include elected officials, local residents, business owners, and community organizations. And I know, because Andrew and I spoke from the very first time we knew that there would be this CDBG money available, this idea was already in his mind. And not to get too philosophical about this, but having known Andrew a long time, what he saw was a chance to put democracy to work, to bring together local communities, every part of those communities, and to form a vision that could drive the work that was ahead of us in rebuilding. The very difficult work, but as he said earlier, all of us must lead. Every one of us must be part of setting that vision for the future. Now, this isn't just about bringing individual communities together. It's also recognizing the need for comprehensive regional planning as well. All of the interconnected systems in our regions across this state must work in concert with each other. Just as I talked about the way that a flood barrier in a tunnel can affect Penn Station next door, it's true that how one community rebuilds its beaches, whether it creates dunes or flood walls along a river, can push water into the community next door. We must think about and work together on these challenges. First, to make sure that the efforts of one community to become more resilient don't undermine the community next door. But even better, regional coordination can help leverage the resources of every community so that by working together, we can achieve far more than we can by working alone. we truly can make this more than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 can equal 3 if all of us work together. Finally, the process will encourage communities to really take a hard look at the risks that they face, not just now, but for generations to come. As I mentioned earlier, rebuilding must be locally driven. But one of the things I've heard from the very first day I was on the ground with the president after Sandy, we need to know what lies ahead. We need to understand what the future holds for our community so we can set the right vision. And so the federal government must play a role in providing communities with the data, the information about the future to make the smartest decisions possible. And that has been at the core of our work in the task force. Last month, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers released a sea rise level planning tool that provides users with information about the future risks of coastal flooding in New York and New Jersey. What does this mean? That means that you, as a city manager, as a county executive, as a mayor, or as an individual homeowner or business owner, can literally go to the web, click, and find out where will the floodplain likely be in 50 years or even 100 years in your community. With a click of a mouse, you can get access to the best science in the world about what is coming for your community. We want to arm every one of you in your communities with the best available information so that you can take the right actions before it's too late. And this sea level rise planning tool will help you do just that. In April, I followed this by announcing that all federally funded rebuilding projects must begin to account for those future risks that are posed by rising sea levels. You all can choose to go above and beyond that using our money, and we know that many of you already have done that. But we want to make sure that we have a guaranteed level of protection to protect you, your citizens, and to protect the federal investment that every taxpayer across this country is making in the recovery of this region. So, as I said, this is something that all of us have a role, and as the governor said, to be leaders in. And it is also personal for every single one of us. New York is home to me. It's where I grew up. It's where I will come back once I finish my federal service. It's where my children grew up for most of their lives. And I want to make sure this state is as great a place for the future generations, my kids and their kids, as it has been for us. The truth is our vulnerability is only increasing as our infrastructure ages, our population grows, and we move even closer to our coasts. That is why this president, this HUD secretary, this entire administration are committed to shape a 21st century region that can withstand the emerging 21st century challenges. I know that each and every one of you here today is committed to that vision as well. And I look forward to our continued work together to ensure that the next chapter in this state's history is its best chapter yet. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
Folks, this concludes the opening program for today's conference. I want to, on behalf of Governor Cuomo, thank Secretary Donovan, Reverend Dr. Mullings, and also Senator Little for their comments and participation, and all of you for being here. The next phase is a luncheon. We're going to invite you to a luncheon. We have a very special guest speaker, Dr. Douglas Brinkley, who's from the Baker Institute of Public Policy at Rice University at the Convention Center. It's going to be first the luncheon and then breakout sessions. Let's go to lunch and go to work. Thank you all.